at like marketing themes because Apple tends to update the App Store and they look at themes that they want to curate apps with, and you guys can.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Henry Kirk, and I'm a partner at a company called Studio.init, and I'm joined with Sven and Max, my other partners. I'll let them do a quick intro. And then we're also joined by Jordan, who has been gracious enough to allow us to do our very first App Teardown. So why would anyone allow us to do an App Teardown? So we're a group of ex-FANG engineers, designers, and researchers, and have been working on mobile for, at least myself, well over a decade. And we absolutely love mobile apps. So we thought that we would do this session for a bunch of folks and try to offer some advice based on our experience to see if we can help improve an app. So why don't, Sven, you're next on the screen here. Why don't you give a quick intro, and then we'll move it on to Max.
Okay, so hello, Bruno. I see you in the attendees. So there's actually people in the attendees. I'm Sven.
Nice.
I do the design for Studio.init, come from tech background, but I'm super interested in this app because my past life was actually a fitness instructor where I taught at Equinox and Barry's for a while. So this is something that I love doing on the side. Pass it on to Max.
I'm Max. I do the product research, yeah, this is exciting because a lot of the stuff that I've been doing in my career has to do with onboarding and getting people to convert to various things. And there was a lot of like stuff there that I think can be really improved and that they'll go through. So yeah, this will be fun.
Awesome. Cool. Jordan, so why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll kick this off by, why don't you give us an overview of kind of what the app is, what your intention is, and I know Max had some general questions for you. So why don't you say hello?
Yeah. So my name is Jordan Clark. I am a product manager by day, and then building Peak Athletics in my free time, along with a couple other guys. So all part-time at this point. I personally come from a more B2B background. So part of the enticing allure to do this with the studio team was they know the B2C space. I have found it is entirely different working with consumers versus enterprises and building out this app. So I'm gracious to be here and have them help tear this apart and figure out how to make it better. As far as Peak itself, the original concept came about, and it was supposed to be more of taking wearable data and giving people actionable, real insights around how to apply that towards like sport-specific training. So if you think of like Whoop, Apple taking all that biometric data and telling someone how to go out and actually apply it and train for their sport or competition. We ran into a lot of issues there, realized it's a lot of capital that would probably be needed to build that. And in some areas we found that consumers are kind of pushing back against wearables too. So it's hard to get someone to wear something 24/7. I know Whoop does a good job with that, but other ones are very tricky. So we pivoted, and we're more focused on actual athlete training and rehab. So the example I like to use, because a lot of people know this in the general population, is the Fitbot app. So they're been around for what, 7-8 years, 20 million plus ARR company. They've raised some capital to get to where they are. But they're using machine learning, helping you set up strength training programs based on your own profile. And we're trying to take that with a similar approach to athlete training and rehab. So my co-founder is a return to play specialist for athletes, strength and conditioning background, trains professional athletes in the Houston area. And the return to play thing is kind of a rehab-esque, but we're trying to build out models where if somebody wants to train for a marathon, triathlon, baseball, football, soccer, those types of sports, they can use this, and we need to make it more dynamic to their training along with their sport-specific training. So really focused on the weight training portion of it. And that's what we're building towards. The app's a little rigid in my opinion right now, but you guys will get to see it here from these guys as they tear it down.
Okay, awesome.
And I got a question for you. How do people discover this usually? Like, how do they run into you? Do you run into them? What's kind of the way that people are introduced to the app?
So, I mean, at this phase, it's very tricky. So it's a lot of in that phase of 0 to 1 where marketing doesn't necessarily make sense. So a lot of it's local events, running ads. We just don't have the money to compete with companies in the space throwing $50,000, $100,000 a month towards spend in that area. So a lot of it is localized, word of mouth, and we've tested some smaller ads on like Instagram that do get some traction if you focus on the right sports and niche, but that's pretty much it right now.
Okay, cool. All right, so why don't we get started on that dive in, unless Max, did you have some more questions?
No, I mean, I guess I just had a follow-up. Like when you're there physically in the events, do you walk them through the app, or do you just introduce them to the app and then they, once they download it, they deal with it on their own?
A lot of it's just introducing them to it right now.
Okay.
We want to get a little further with that, and that's been more of a recent thing that we're starting to do, is get more and trying to win the local environment first and then try to go broader. But also App Store search optimization, focus on that as well. But like I said, we're not paying to play there either.
Makes sense. Yeah. Let's get started.
Great. Awesome. So let me get this going here. All right, here we are. So I just opened up the app. So you saw I go from my phone here, and I opened up the app. So this is the first thing that the user sees when they open up the app, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Max, why don't you
give
a little start
this
here.
is a design paradigm that hasn't worked very well. There's some research which I'll share out, like an article called "Mobile App Onboarding and Analysis of Components and Techniques," where they kind of go through different designs. This is from the Nielsen and Norman group, and basically what they talk about is that this paradigm isn't always very effective, or usually very effective. When we worked at Google, Google has a lot of apps, and a common theme that we saw across them. And at Google, we call this a warm welcome. It just like wasn't converting well. This whole like slider in between things in the beginning. And then, something that we found that was, if for example, you want to have it in there, right, is to have a way to skip it right away. Because what you have here is essentially 3 screens that you can't skip. So when you think about like converting users, right, there's a funnel there from like them downloading it to them getting in the app to them picking a workout. Every extra click, step, swipe is a moment where they can potentially completely disengage. And so here you have 3 moments in a row where they don't necessarily care about what's written. And some of the studies I've done were like, I'd have people go through these tutorial screens, right? And then immediately after they were done, like ask them what was on the screens. Like 50% of the time, people could not mention a single thing, even though they spent like a moment or two looking at the screens. So it's very hard to get this to be helpful. And the best way to get it to be helpful is to make it, first of all, optional. So just have a call to action on the bottom to just like get in right away, right? And then if somebody wants to explore some of these screens, they can, but they don't have to, right?
Yep.
You know what your current conversion is here on the last screen, just to kind of like dive a little deeper into what Max is saying. So do you know how many people tapped which option here?
I unfortunately don't have visibility into like each screen. This view you're looking at will only show up on the first time you download the app. And then from there, like if you remove the app and re-download it, based on if you have the same device, it won't show up again. But I don't have visibility into that, unfortunately. Like there's some stuff around like data collection and visibility on tracking that we don't have enough information on. And that's just a limitation on our end of not having development team that's part of the team right now.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, like just in my experience working with this, like I think Max is right that a lot of people just quickly swipe through it and they just want to get to the next thing. But if you did want to make this sort of, if you did have have this like training that kind of enticed them as to why they, like what you're trying to do is you want them to have a decision to convert by the end potentially, right? Free or try. And I think that the majority of people are going to choose free because there hasn't been much value given in this initial screen. So what you could do is you can kind of like, and when we go through the other app, is you can also just make this more contextual. So like, and I'll give you an example later, is that like you have jazzes up to make it very targeted towards what the user is trying to do. as opposed to being very broad and generic where it may not apply to all users. So the kind of the value that you're trying to get them to convert here is really not there, in the same way like Max was explaining that like most users you would ask me like, I don't remember what it said. So I think like it could just, you can probably just skip this whole thing in here and then try to convert them later contextually based on what you want them to accomplish. So and then one other comment, which we'll dive in a little bit later here, is the text is very small. So it's very hard to read on here. And I have larger text set on here. So from a technical standpoint, I would recommend that you also support the dynamic type, so that way it would enlarge and fit the user's screen. But we'll get to that a little bit. So I'll continue with the free plan. All right, so then this is the next screen that they're going to see here. There's not too much here, but on a technical piece, I'll just jump in that what is not working properly here is the password autofill. It should have already suggested the password when I had created an account earlier. And so it looks like there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And I'll show you where also it does that again. So when I then tap sign up, if I'm a brand new user, it gates me here. So Max or Sven, if you guys.
Yeah, can we go back a moment?
Sure.
So, one thing here, right, is that there's no what we call SSO. There's no way to like just log in with a Google account, with a Facebook account, with any of these things. You have to create an email name and password, which is itself like a big point of friction. Just by like having some of these integrations in here, you would, like everyone has those accounts and it's like a one-click thing and they don't have to remember their password. Creating like a whole password for like a smaller service, it can be a lot for a lot of users. So that's definitely something I would add in here.
Yeah, and on the SSO thing, in my own apps, what I've noticed is that I used to have email and password, and we had a lot of issues where people were tapping forgot password constantly. That was pre-password autofill, and then with password autofill, like it was a lot better, but they would still forget it. But then we added in SSO auth in one of my apps, and I have Facebook, Google, and Apple as a choice because Apple sign-in is required. And what I've noticed, all of the tech support emails went from, I forgot my password, I need some help, to I can't remember which social sign-in I used. So what I would recommend is if you wanted to reduce the friction, try to avoid, with an app like yours, since it's so simple and straightforward, lock it down to just Apple, sign in with Apple, because likely everybody that would subscribe or have downloaded already has an Apple account, and just make it tied to that and then potentially add in others later. Because I think it's interesting that people will forget what they used, and then it'll either create a new account and then you have to deal with like in-app purchase, like linking it together and other problems that maybe you just don't want to go down that route. So if you do want to do like a one-click sign-in, like I would just recommend signing with Apple to avoid like that confusion, because it may end up happening.
Okay, that makes sense.
In my own apps have had that problem before.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can tell you, like going back to the visibility on the screens, like I don't know where people are falling off, but we have, and it's not well defined, but we use Heap analytics on the app. And it's more of just seeing like session information. But we do see a lot of people fall off very early. So some of this could be related to what we just went through with the onboarding screen. Some of it could be the friction of signing up. I think you guys have just pointed out two things right there that we've had friction on that first initial download that could deter people. Because I mean, people are very quick, and if you can't let them get some value out of it, you just see them abandon immediately and they don't even move forward. So like that's good feedback to you.
Yeah. And this screen that's on right now, I would cut that entirely. I don't think you need it, right? Like you create your username and password. I don't think there's a value to basically the way people learn products the best is by interacting with them, right? Like the sooner you can get a person into the app and just start like getting a perspective of like what's in there, how does it work, right? Like it's so much better than providing some kind of like background context before, when they don't have any frame of reference for what might be in there. So a good kind of technique is when you want to teach a user something or bring attention to something, like kind of put it in the context of the experience. Once you're already in there, right? Like if you want to talk about workouts where the workouts are. not like a screen beforehand that talks about workouts, because that information is not getting mapped onto a context that they're going to be able to use when they're using the app, because they don't have the context yet.
Yeah, and we'll go through. I want to go through this quickly because we're getting a lot of feedback on here, and there's other stuff we want to get to. So the password, again, like the password Safari autofill is not functioning perfectly. You can't really see what I'm seeing here entirely on the screen, but it should have suggested a password for this, knowing that it's a new signup. So one of the fields must be set wrong. And then another thing that I noticed is that I can have a password of like ABC123. I go next. I type in my name, I hit next, right? I hit create account. And then it gives me an error that my password didn't conform, which is kind of frustrating because now I have to go all the way back and go back to then fix it. So I'd recommend like trying to have at least some sort of indication if the password meets the right requirements. Forget how long it's got to be, but and then some feedback on here. I don't know, Sven or Max, you want to jump in, but again, like when working at Google and other companies, it's always best to ask for permissions contextually when they're about to do something that would be useful. So that way they kind of understand the why. And so when you're signing up on here, you're unclear what you are syncing with. And there are just options that come in here, and then you don't know what the app does to then give the user the right context to know what to turn on and what to turn off. Same thing with like Strava in here. So I definitely would recommend you kind of do it later when it's needed, so that way, like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know, Sven, you have any comments on this?
I think, Jordan, this is totally like you and I, right? We know right away like what this is for. This is the user who's like super into fitness, who has all this, like myself. So like I get what you're trying to do, but if you're trying to grow, again, everyone has already said it, we really just want to land them into your app right away. And then like when they're logging a workout or browsing, you want to then ask for those. I think I can tackle some of the colors. So one thing that I noticed is like your fields, it's kind of outlined right now. You want to consider doing like filled in boxes just for people who don't see very well versus like lines. Lines are really hard to read, like outline buttons, like add training is an outline button. So we always want to go to fill buttons, like browse program is filled. And the reason why is because it allows for sufficient contrast that you can actually see what you're doing, right? So if you want to do a secondary button, just try to use like a lighter color or like a darker color instead of outlines. In terms of red, I would just try to avoid, it looks red to me. So I would just try to go more towards like the blue spectrum or a little bit more softer if you're trying to get people to move throughout your app.
Got it. Makes sense.
Cool. All right. So Max.
Yeah, so on this screen, one big questions I had, right, is you have like 3 screens. One is if you look at the bottom, right, your navigation, you got profile, you got programs, and you got home. But then when you're on home, what you have on home is browse programs. And so that was a little bit confusing to me when I first went in. I'm like, you got a programs tab, and then on home, you're browsing programs. So it's like, if the very, and right, like, Henry, I guess, do you recall like when V landed, did V land on home?
Yes. And when you tap browse programs, it moves you to the next tab.
So
so normal,
just context on that, and you can tell me this is entirely wrong still, but I just want to point out that's on the initial sign up that will show that for the home screen. And the reason we did that was because if you go to the home screen when you first log in and you don't have anything there, it's pretty much blank other than it has like some daily workouts, which weren't there originally when we built it, and we haven't adjusted these screens. But that was the reason to shift them to the programs, because we wanted them to go look at the programs and make that selection versus having some blank home screen right away. That might not be the right way to do it, but just some context around that.
Yeah, that'll make sense. I think the biggest thing, right, like if you're thinking of someone who just is gonna like leave the app very easily, right? Because they're not latched in yet. They don't have a workout. They're just trying to figure out, right, what they want to do. To make it like as quick as possible for them to discover the value of that, because we haven't gotten to the value yet, right? The value is in the workouts and the programs. Here you have like a screen that doesn't add value and you have to browse programs versus like, even if you landed them in the programs tab right away, like they have content. I think what you want to do when the person lands for the first time is have content for them to look at right away, something that can grab their attention, because there's nothing on this specific screen right that grab your attention. Like take another piece of initiative, which is like click browse programs, and then you got like some value, right? So I find a way to kind of like remove that friction a little bit.
And to kind of add on that, I think what you also want to do is, since I've chosen the free option and I've landed into the app here, you want to have it easy for me to be able to try it out and get a feel for what that actual value prop of the app is. And so, Sven, do you have any comments on here? Otherwise, I can show you the next example, which we can probably dive in on.
Yeah, we can go to the next one.
Okay. So like if I'm a new user and like I'm following kind of with the expected flow that you have, and I go into browse programs and I tap on strength and conditions, I'm like, oh, cool. I'm going to go with this minimal equipment one. And I'm like, all set, great. And then I choose, I'm going to start today. Boom. I'm hit with you got to subscribe for this. So there's no way for me to really try out the app in a good way to know that this is going to work out for me. And so what I have to do, and this is what I was figuring out later, is I had to go add training. And then I was like, all right, well, I click create training, but then I get stuck and I hit add training. And then I was like, oh, when I started hitting a letter, I saw all of the sample kind of workouts in here. Mm-hmm. So we can dive into it, but like the general flow, like me not having been in it, trying to tap around to get a feel for what the app kind of like offers, I was stuck, and it took me a lot of discovery to figure out what it was. So if you're seeing a drop off after that, that's likely because the users are like, I just don't get this app, and they just delete it, right? So if you want them to kind of go for a flow where it's like create your own plan, I wouldn't steer them towards the programs unless you have a free program and then it says like free trial. Like you can emphasize that maybe in programs here. It says like free starter program, start here or something like that. Or if you want them to add their own, it's like add your own training, but I would have it show everything in here to start. Yeah. So somebody can kind of browse this. And also, I don't know what anyone else would think, but this is too small of a dialogue. I think you should make this full screen, so that way you can see more than just a few options on here. Because I have to hit search for it to get the full screen, and it doesn't feels a little weird being like a partial modal like this. So I would recommend it be like that, so that way I can like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to give it a try with speed training, and then I can go get started in that workout that I'm doing, right? Yep. So that's what I would recommend you do. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Go ahead, Sven.
Oh, as I was going to say, I really like your art direction, and I totally understand where this is going. I think the patterns all make it's a little bit too small. One thing that I noticed on the programs is like return to play and strength and conditioning are a little bit, well, return to play, I don't know what that is. So you might want to consider like much more beginner friendly language, like recovering from an injury or rehabbing program, right?
Yeah.
And strength and condition. Yeah.
That one's a little tricky because rehab, we didn't want to like get ourselves in trouble too early by saying rehab and people thinking it's more of like acute stage where like you really need a physical therapist. It's really the sex part that you do after that. So we haven't readjusted to this, and we've gotten feedback that a lot of people don't completely understand it, to your point. It's kind of a more sport training specific verbiage, but at the same time we've been hesitant to use the words rehab just because of we don't want someone to be injured and injure themselves further. So but yeah, that's a tricky one that we're still trying to navigate around how to word that one properly. And that might just be adding context around what it means and some way to have a dialogue box pop up or something modal.
Or a little text at the bottom, right? Like you can always add a little body text. You can have like branded titles, but then just add a body text like this is da 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 da.
Yeah, like a little description of what it might be good for. And you could even add it in this screen potentially too. Yeah. So, okay, so how about we dive in so I've already added my own training here, and we realize that this whole screen is locked to subscriptions in here. So this may be good. Just jumping back to kind of that onboarding that we saw when we first joined. If you don't have a free one, which we would highly suggest you have some sort of free thing that I can dive into right away. That's maybe like a good generic one, and you want to lock this to the premium thing in here. You can maybe have a little lock icon, just a symbol that it's not free or not. But then what you can also do is when you tap on into it and you go into it, maybe it's going to have like and you go to subscribe, instead of saying, hey, you need to have a subscription, you then jump into that. Let's talk about the value of what you get and why, and then maybe offer that. I see you had I think it was a 14-day free trial, if I'm right.
7
in this screen. 7-day. Okay. So 7-day free trial. So this is like the only screen that you get to basically convince the user to try out that free one. So obviously a free one is going to work out best. But then, if you can show them enough value for your other workouts, then this screen needs a bunch of work. We can start here if we want. We can go. Yeah, you want to go here, guys? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that text is really small, right, to start out with, and it's not a lot to entice you. You don't have a good mental, like you have to really focus and read to understand the difference between what's comes free, what's premium, right, and like what the value of premium is. This is an area I think, right, like you had some nice screens in onboarding, which I said you should take it all out. Here, there might be some opportunity, right, to like really design something that kind of sells premium.
What SDK are you using to build this kind of landing page? Do you know?
I am not sure.
Okay. There's a bunch of services that have popped up over the last few years or so that allow you to make these kind of like pricing tables, like paywalls. I actually think it's like paywalls.com, but I'm a big fan of RevenueCat. I've been using them for years, and I'm pretty sure they just launched a like pricing table kind of paywall feature that you can add in, that you can power from their backend, do like A/B testing, and then it doesn't force you to have to build the whole thing, and you can kind of use that. And Apple also has something too that I believe with iOS 17, I might be wrong, but I will double check. But you can also create some pricing tables now with some of the new things that Apple has offered too. I forget the version though, but I can follow up. And so that way you don't have to like work on building this, because this is very hard, because there are a lot of things you have to consider. Like you have the offer code in here, you have the restore purchases, privacy policy, terms and conditions, all required by Apple. If you don't have it, you're going to get rejected. And then you have to create that whole upsell. So if you can spend the time in here to make sure that you are explaining the upsell correctly, what the free is. I would even have a button in here that says free, like your current plan, and then the premium, and then maybe something else. Or you probably don't even need to have the yearly up here if you only have 2 options. Mm-hmm. You probably can like make that space and just be like, save 15% by going yearly with a different button or something like that, and whatever that discount is. Yeah, because like essentially, like this is the only screen that you're really trying to convince the user to then make a decision. And then I don't know what would happen if I were to tap on this and then end up in a situation where I needed to downgrade. Like, can I do that in here, or do I have to then go and manage my subscription in Apple? So besides the fact, like I think there's plenty of SDKs out there you can utilize that'll give you the features you're looking for. And then you can focus on the value elsewhere, so you don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel here. But if you did want to customize it, you could.
Yeah. So when you say SDK, I guess I was thinking of the actual paywall screen. We do have RevenueCat
cool.
attached to all the payments, but I did see that in the last week or two, or I can't remember how long ago it was that they announced they were doing the paywalls.
Yeah.
I don't have enough expertise around it to play with it myself, but I did see that. I know there's another one out there as well. And I utilize like the sub club like group, and have seen people talking about different ways they're using that and A/B testing around these paywall screens as well. So all good information.
Yeah, they're great because they're a ton of work to build. So if you're limited on resources and you're either going to build your own and make it a really good upsell screen where it's pretty obvious to help the user what they want to choose, or you use one of these other ones like Revenue Cats is great, or you go and then you spend the time in the like maybe a quick onboarding screen to like show the value with some examples or testimonials or something like that. But then when they land on this, they have more context and they're ready to make a purchase. Same thing with like here, it's like I'm blocked because I want to take an action, but I don't really know what the app does yet. But again, maybe the free one would probably help it. So then I would just jump in and do that. So that is that. You guys have any other, Max, Sven, anything else?
So this is a thing, right, where I don't know if I'm recommending it, but it's like an option and it has worked well for some apps. So it's something to consider and maybe test, right? Is that you had a lot of onboarding about like explaining the app. Another kind of onboarding that has worked for some apps is essentially where you customize and personalize during onboarding. And so like there might be an opportunity, right? And I guess let me give you an example of one of them. So like Flipboard, for example, is a news aggregator. When you come in there for the first time, they ask you to like pick a bunch of topics and then they give you your newspaper with all the topics, right? And so like instead of explaining like this is a magazine, you're going to get these topics, they're just like here, just click on these topics, right? So there might be something where it could convert well, right? If you have like, because you have all these use cases for the programs and workouts, right? For different people, for different reasons why they would choose various things. So recovering from stuff. Other ones might end up being for different reasons, right? So maybe something where you like pick that right away and then like you already come in and things already like kind of personalized for what you're, what the user's trying to do. Could convert well, but it definitely like the way I would do it is first like do it without it, because a lot of times making it the simplest and just dropping people in the app converts the best. And then like you could consider adding it in and seeing like, does your conversion go up? Does it go down? Because it is something that like sometimes it adds and sometimes it takes away. And you just kind of have to like experiment with it for your own app.
Yeah, no, that's good things to think about. I mean, the long-term goal is for the entire, like the workouts themselves to also be personalized. So at some point it's going to have to be personalized up front a little more either way, and to navigate them towards what we want it to build out for them. So yeah, I'd be interested in feedback on how to properly do that, but I don't want to sidetrack yet.
We can get to that. Absolutely. For sure. So, all right, so let's go into the starting a workout here. I think that was the easiest for me once I figured it out to get into the flow, was like, see what I'm going to do and then get started. So this is the screen that you enter once you've started a workout. My personal feedback is it's great that I can start a video in here and see what I'm doing and pause it. Super easy, no frills. Like I don't have to worry about like complex controls or anything. So I think this is really great. The coaching cues was cool, except the text is really tiny. So like, I think that's a great feature to have in there. And then this overview, I don't know if it's really necessary, but just shows you the workout. So
I will say from the overview, and maybe that's not the proper term, but we did get feedback before we iterated on that people wanted to be able to, like in between sets, look ahead and be like, okay, what's coming? So and there's probably other ways to put that on the screen, but that was the like quick and dirty way to make it where people could see the entire workout, what they had ahead of them. I'm also like trying to really keep the actual aspect of the workout and the screens very simple, because a lot of apps get very cluttered and hard to use, and there's so many functions all over the place. So that was part of that reasoning, but like I said, might not be the best path for it, and just trying to make it where people have stuff. And this is, and still in my mind, this is like version 1. We know it's not where it needs to be. But if you guys have recommendations of ways where like you could show that without that overview button, and I know that we've already talked about the buttons themselves, like not having them just be outlined. So that's one thing to clean up, but other ways to give people that context of what's coming.
Well, when you hit this right arrow, sorry.
You have a lot of space at the bottom, like between overview. I would consider like maybe using that space, like maybe you can have pictures like right and left, indicate like what's next. I know a lot of like YouTube, when you do a YouTube workout video, a lot of the influencers, you'll be in preview, and then on the bottom right, it'll be like, up next, you're going to have a bird dog. You know what I mean? So you could almost copy that, right? Where you can keep it focused, but you utilize the bottom rail as like little text with images of what's coming up next.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, I mean, no particular feedback in here and like how you enter in the weights and other stuff like that. I think that's fine. So, all right, so we'll move on. So I tap the green button down here and then it moves me to the next exercise. And it basically allows me to move between all of these. So I'll just go through and finish a whole workout here. Okay. All right, quite a workout.
Yeah, I know that there's some consistency issues with the videos of like the background stuff. Just that's a matter of adding different movements and not having videos. So
I don't think that's a big deal. That doesn't bother me at all. There's an app that I use for my training, and the videos are terrible. So these are great. Like they're clear, they're high quality, and the usability is easy. So I didn't have any problem with that at all. All right, cool. All right, here's done. Yeah. All right. So this is what happens. This is what you see when you're done. So the UX on here, just for folks watching, is I originally started tapping on the circle to make it work, but what I realized I have to do is I have to drag this little circle, this little thing on here, and I have to go around, and I can go all the way around and go back. So it just took me a second or two. But it was fine. A little weird to use, but once I figured it out, it was okay.
Yeah, if you love this pattern, because I've seen it done before on Airbnb, it's doable. You just got to make the button really, really big, like the width of the circle, like the line, you're going to make it really, really thick. So you go on Airbnb and you try to book a place, they actually use a similar pattern, but the difference between this one and theirs is like the width of that line is like gigantic. So it makes it easier to touch with your thumb, right? So I think if you really like this pattern, just make it really, really big and easier to like tap on.
Is there an alternative pattern that you've seen that is easier for users? Like I know that I'm closest to this. I use this daily on my own training and stuff. So like, but I also realize I am not every person, and I am okay with changing things. Like it's not one of those things where I know people have a business and they're like, well, I want it this way and this way. It's like whatever users get the most value and the best user experience. I don't really care beyond that. It's as long as it has what they need and it functions properly. So if you have thoughts around better ways than that wheel, I am open to that.
So I'll suggest two options. My personal favorite is to limit the amount of options you have. So right now you have a scale of 0 to 9. So I would just consider 3 options. It was easy. It was kind of hard. It was extremely hard. And then put it in a card. If you want to use 0 to 9 as numerical numbers, instead of a circle, you can always go with a horizontal slider. That's a little bit easier to follow because people, they're used to this, right? Versus going around. So like I said, my favorite would be reducing the 3 cards where you can tap 1, 2, 3. But if you really like that number, I don't know what your business is like, you can always use the slider.
Yeah, so it actually is supposed to go to 10, but I realized the wheel doesn't allow you to get to 10. But it actually is a 1 to 10 scale. I don't think you can go back to it now, but there is a pop-up that shows what that actually means. Yeah, hit that question mark. And it will show you what those mean. And these are typically used in the strength and conditioning world where it's like kind of helps people gauge how much effort and intensity they're supposed to put into a workout. You can use this instead of using like percentages. So if you think about if you're back squatting, sometimes it'll be like, hey, use 80% of your 1 rep max. So you can do that. You can use an RPE scale, things like that. So there is a purpose behind it. We haven't figured out exactly how we want to utilize it, whether that'll tell someone up front in the beginning of a workout, like, hey, this is an RPE of 6. Like you should be focused on this. Still getting feedback. Do people understand that enough? Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Like Sven's suggestion for a slider, I think makes a lot of sense. Here you have like a scale, right? So it's something that like starts at one extreme and goes to the other extreme. The circle, I think, kind of like confuses that a little bit because basically you have something that like goes all the way around, and and basically you end up where you started. And then the second piece of it, right? Like I don't think, in terms of like these labels, right? Like you don't want, I don't think you want like these explanations on like separate screens from the scale. Like when people, like if you had a slider, for example, you could underneath it show some of this data, right? And so people understand what they're selecting and the moment of selecting it versus, you know, having a slider and then like having an instruction screen that's completely separate.
That's a great idea. So like as you're going around it, like, because like what I was just going to suggest is just have this be the buttons they tap to choose so they can see what it is. But if you did it with the scale and on the bottom below here for finish, it just would show you what, as I'm going around, it would show you and the text of like, you know, this is moderate, super hard, you know, so that way I know what it is.
Do you guys know with like Swift or Apple in general, like to have a dynamic, so as you're going around the wheel, maybe there's something below it, the label is changing as you move, or along, is that something?
Yeah, totally. This is either custom drawn or this is like a UI picker control kind of thing modified or some sort of like line that a slider that's just manipulated. So absolutely, like you can hook a listener in here and then just change it on there. But yeah, you just want to give the user some active feedback if they're new to this. So they kind of know what to do, and then you don't need all this education in here to remind them.
Yeah, and I will also say you had some input fields, right? Before there might be something to like making it more consistent, because then you can have like a single component that works for, or a piece of a component that works in various places. And like when you're putting in the weights and stuff, it's a completely different UI. So like having the same kind of thing, right? It could be, save you resources and engineering, but also like more intuitive for users.
So when the original developers that we used built like the weights, rest, and all that, and all that, those input fields, they had it as like a scrolling option. The problem I ran into was if you're lifting something very heavy and the weight always starts very low, like they're constantly like scrolling too long. So it was quicker to just type it in manually. And then the other issue with the scrollers, like right there, you'll see on the height, like it still does exist on certain areas. Like it was like that, but it was for the weights. But then if somebody's doing like a kettlebell, that's an off number. So if it's like 62 pounds, like you'd have to have every numerical option in there. So that's where we figured it was just easier to allow them to manually input it. There might be better options. I just don't know how to do that. But I do like what you're saying. Like I like things when you're building it for a product to have them uniform across the entire product. So you're using similar design library components and so forth. So I do get that there are we're using different things in different areas. And I'd be interested to figure out how to make that a little more uniform.
So before we move on, I want to show you a bug that I got the state into. So take a look at the very lower corner of the screen. There's a little done button that pops up. I don't know if you noticed that. I was trying to figure out how it gets there to give you that, but it looks like it might even just be the tip of one of these pickers. It's probably what it is, and it's just showing up for some reason. Yes, it's not there every time, but yeah, there it is. I don't know why it's there. It's like stuck at the bottom. Anyway, I noticed that. So we should jump into some enhancements that you wanted to talk about. But the one other thing I would just say, getting back to the contextual part where you were talking about integrating with Apple Health Kit or Strava, is on the end of the workout page when you're done. That may be a good time to ask the user if they want to like save it and sync with Apple Health, because that's when they're going to write out the workout that they did potentially. So that may be a good screen, like the first time to ask for permission for any one of these in there, depending on what you want to do. And the same thing with like the weights in here, like your weight and height. Sometimes it's in Apple Health Kit. So maybe like if they go to change it and it pops in and says, hey, would you like to pull this in from Apple Health kind of thing, just to encourage them to turn it on.
Yeah, and the original idea of why we asked for like Apple Health up front was because the idea was to just pull it from their Apple Health information, which we've also found that not everybody fills that stuff out. I'm probably a weirdo that just uses Apple Health, and I
I'm
look
a,
at
I'm a weirdo too. Yeah, I use it daily.
but we realized that not everybody does that. The other thing is, and it's tricky because you could ask at the end of the workout, you could put it there, which might make sense. It's like the first workout, okay, maybe you're not going to get all this information, but we do collect some of that heart rate information and all that stuff. So we're capturing that information in our AWS side where we're storing our data. So if we don't get it up front, then we don't really necessarily.
Oh, sure. So then do it up front. So then do it right before I start a workout. Maybe maybe not right when, because then that's going to annoy the user when they want to start on the workout, like some sort of interstitial, like it stops them from taking the action is bad. But if it's maybe the first time they're entering into like a program just to, to get it set up or something, just that way it's obvious. Like then you can say, well, we're asking, and you can also have a little interstitial, kind of like you do for the subscription, where it says, please subscribe down here. When you come up here, when you tap that, you'd be like, hey, would you like to connect Apple Health to have better whatever it might be in there, like what the value is, and then yes or no, and then you just don't ask them again, kind of thing, to be more contextual there.
Yeah, I wonder if even when they go to start the first workout, it could pop up and be like, hey, do you want to sync with these? Like, I don't know. We'd have to figure out how you're portraying the value of doing it also still. Like that is something to think about, but I like the idea of adding it in different areas, or it could even be post workout. Like if they cancel out, it's like, hey, putting it at the end could be a thing where it's like, maybe they don't track it on the first one, which is fine. But trying to get them to see the value of adding it eventually.
Yeah,
great.
I think that's a good approach, just like getting them to learn more about the features over time, because it is a lot to take in at once. I mean, I think the one thing you want them to do in the beginning is just get into a workout, do it in any way, right? And then all this other stuff that's like extra, right? Like there's always moments to like introduce it to them on the second visit, the third visit, and just keep kind of selling the value.
Okay, awesome, cool. So in the sake of time, this is a lot of fun, and we have about 9 minutes left, so people are probably going to start dropping off. So why don't we jump into questions you might have, Jordan, and any of the areas like that you wanted to dive in, like AI or anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, the main question first, we don't have to go super deep into this, but like I was talking about earlier, we eventually want to create these models where we're making it more dynamic, more personalized, and walking people through to get to the point where they're building a program that's based on their actual sport or competition they're training for. Like, how would you guys approach this to get to that? Because right now we're offering programs from my co-founder, and we want to eventually get where it's very customized, and like that's why I use Fitbot as an example. I know that they're more like general population strength focused, but what are the things we need to think about? Like surveys, walking people through, like if you guys just have any high level thoughts of how to get to that point of building these models and having it dynamic and customized.
So this would be the input data in here. So this is like a program for kind of coming back after a post injury. So when you say the different programs to customize, it would be like, oh, I'm like trying to get my knee back in shape, and then this is the recommended program, that sort of thing. So I want help putting a knee program together.
It could be that, or it could be where they never even see program options. It's more of like gathering information about what they're training for. Like, do you have a date for your competition? Are you in season, off season? And you're just, instead of them picking from options or recommended choices, you're building the program for them. So it's more customized versus kind of steering them.
I can talk about the technical implementation, but do you guys want to talk about the experience for that?
Yeah, there's 3 options that you can approach. Which one you're already doing, which is automated through health data, right? Another way is manual curation, which is you set them up on an onboarding, like what type of athlete are you? What expertise are you doing? You give them like generic questions and then you recommend it. The third option is more like social media tracking. So TikTok, you watch a video, or you click on something, they track that you want to do that because there's a high intent that you're doing that. So there are these things that you can do, which are called like, I guess like social automation, where maybe you can just at the start recommend a program. And if they don't like it, they can just swipe right or swipe left, right? And then you can just start to personalize it off of that. So you're kind of pushing content on them, taking your best guess, and then you let them decide if it's good or not. And then you can just filter it through that. So TikTok is a great example where they just put you in a video and you don't like it, you swipe away, then they know on the back end that that's a cue that do not show more videos. But if you stay and watch a video for like 10 seconds, they're like, aha, let's continue showing him more of this.
That's a great way to do that. So Jordan, would you envision this as kind of being where I have some sort of idea of what I want to do, or I have to be guided through the whole process?
It should be where you have some sort of idea. So say you're training for a marathon and you want to add in some strength training a couple of days a week along with your running. Like that's kind of the use case. So focusing primarily early on athletes and somebody that has something that like you could have like, oh, I just want longevity, like general strength training, that's fine. But it's probably the second scenario that Sven was talking about where you're kind of almost like a decision tree, like asking them these questions. But my concern is running into overloading them with too many questions, not giving them value. Like you go back to that whole situation where we had too many screens and people don't know the value, where if we're up front asking them too many questions about what they're training for, they don't know the value yet. Like, how do you get around that?
Yeah. So I think a big piece of it is figuring out like getting this personalized thing gives you more value, right? But it requires more work. The question really is this generic, uncustomized, unpersonalized thing. Does it have enough value for a user to get started? If it's not compelling by itself, then you've got to think about how to get that personalization in right away. If it is compelling, I would say like you kind of, it might be better to just get them started with something and then tweak stuff, right? Like you have stuff like Google does this with their news feed, right? Where you might get news stories and then like over time, you're like, I'm not interested in this. I am interested in this. So you could start with something kind of like the two kind of from the user standpoint, ways you can do this is like you're going into a personalization experience right away. Or the other one is that like you get a generic thing and then over time, you're just asking like one question at a time per visit. It's like this or that, right? And then like over time, it becomes personalized, but it's not like a single sit down answering a bunch of questions kind of thing.
Yeah. Quick question. Would you want to provide tweaks week over week for their training, or is it one and done once they choose a program that they're happy with?
It would be tweaking on its own. So like the eventual idea is to have the models where they're adjusting for the user. So say you're looking at the percentage of weights they're using, say they can't quite use that weight, say they are training running or they got sick and they missed a workout. Like we want it to be dynamic enough long-term that is auto adjusting on a weekly, or sooner.
Are you familiar with the RP Diet app, the Renaissance Periodization Diet app at all?
I have not used the app. I know RP Strength and their diet and whatnot. I've seen like the old school when they used to just do it with send you a PDF. I have not used it.
Yeah. So if you use their app every week based on the inputs that you have, the calories, your weight, and other things, they adjust your calories and your macros up and down to try to get you to where your goal is. So what I would recommend that you do is, and this is the technical implementation, I could be wrong on the UX a little bit, but I would have an onboarding screen so that way you can get the different inputs. I want to do a marathon. I want to do this. I have this much time to do that. And then what I would do is to kind of make it either manually curate the then results there with some sort of decision tree like Sven hinted at, so that way you can get somewhere to start. Or what I would do is train like a GPT model off of all of the types of exercises and workouts that you have that your partner had created. So that way it kind of like spits out one or two and say, do you like this? No, and tweak it right there. And then start the user on it. And then you can then build in those different tweaks in there, because those will be all based off of the check-in at the end of the week. Right. So what'll end up happening is like, since it's week over week, it'll say, okay, well, based on your week here, we're going to tweak this. You could do that through a variety of different ways. But what I would recommend until you kind of like build critical mass is make it very simple. So if you say, we're just going to tweak the weights a little bit, you missed 2 workouts, we're going to reduce it, keep it the same. And then as the users give you feedback and you kind of build it, you can then get smarter and build a really intelligent model that actually will like look at it and say, oh, well, your RPE was like 10 this week coming back from this, then like we want to bring it down because you probably didn't, complete this weight as what we thought, or you were supposed to do 8 reps and you did 5, right? And you can build that over time in there, but I would almost cheat it a little bit with like, and depending on how many users you have in here, you can even do it manually on the back end and just like, once a week, like review folks' results and just tweak it yourself. And then that'll also give you some insights into kind of like how people are sticking with things to kind of get the data. But that would be the implementation that I would recommend, kind of like just the start here is to do it really cheap and kind of don't spend a ton of time building a sophisticated model because you don't know if it's going to actually work.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to do it. I hadn't thought about like doing a weekly kind of like review of it, and whether that's, I guess, were you thinking more of like it pops up for them to give feedback based on how they think the week went, or do you think it's more we just do it, like we could get away doing it manual in the beginning, like you just said, it's one of those things of like do things that don't scale that everybody likes to bring up, where it's you're just doing it manually on the back end, nobody knows any difference.
Yeah, exactly. You could be like, hey, how did your week go? What's your check-in? So like I have a coach myself, and through an app, like every week he has the same questions. He checks in and he sends me a video with like, hey, how it's doing. This is what we're going to tweak. But you could do that in the back end where it's like, let's log how your week went. Here's certain metrics that are important. And then just one of you, you or your partner just go in. Now, obviously this doesn't scale great when you have a lot of users. Maybe it could be an upsell. Maybe it turns out that this personalized thing is really what they're looking for, and you don't want to build an AI tool in this, and they just like charge an extra, maybe it's $50 a month kind of service, right? But if you do AI, then what you do is you'll kind of learn how that is going to change, and then you can give the model all of these different variable inputs. GPT is great for this sort of simple stuff. And then you can also train other simple models like, but you'll need a ton of the data. And so you'll need to have the history to then be able to like train the model so that way you can have that desired outcome for these users and know when to go up and down, but you need to get that data first. So this might be a way to get that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, I appreciate that. I have tons of other questions, but I know we're at time, so.
Yeah, why don't you throw a couple more at us? Like I'm having a lot of fun. We can go a few minutes over because like we've dived really deep in this. And I don't even know how to ask any viewers if they have questions or anything. So we'll have to do that another time. Yeah, so fire away, Jordan.
A lot of it might even be just simple like marketing ASO type things. If you guys have thoughts on anything around like optimization for the App Store, do you guys, any of you have experience with dealing with that?
Yeah, so my recommendation for you is if you want to get promoted in the App Store, you want to use a lot of iOS features. So sign in with Apple is a good one. Pay with Apple is another one. So you want to make sure you're the best iOS app, meaning like you're using all the tools, right? If you have like different players in it, it muddies the narrative that Apple is trying to promote themselves. So they always curate apps on that. Another thing that I would really recommend is look at themes around the world that match to what you're trying to do, right? Apple loves a good narrative around themes. So like think about I don't know, there might be like breast cancer awareness month, right? You could tailor some of your content towards that. So like look at like marketing themes, because Apple tends to update their app store and they look at themes that they want to curate apps with, and you guys can easily propel yourselves in that, right? So we're always looking at ways that we can attach our narrative to what they're trying to tell.
Got it. Did not know that. That's good to know.
Cool. Any other questions?
I guess as far as, well, a lot of them would be things we can't even share on the screen because it's like back-end infrastructure type thing. But like, I guess just last question, generalized, probably more towards you, Henry, since you're more on the technical side of this. But any thoughts around like how to properly structure this? Like how should we be collecting data? Are there like recommendations of services we should use? Like if knowing our long-term goal, like, do you have any thoughts of things we should be doing now that'll help us in the long term to get to that point versus right now? I mean, a lot of it's just AWS, S3, those types, Lambda is how we're set up. But if you have any thoughts around that, I would love to hear that.
So on the technical side, there's a million different services, but Max is probably the guy to talk about like collecting data. So I'll let him jump in for that question.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the back end, there are a whole bunch of options, and then most of them do work pretty well. I mean, in terms of like kind of like systems to look at various analytics, like I think Mixpanel and Amplitude work really well these days. Google Analytics is falling a little bit behind. In terms of the data you collect, like a thing that a lot of people have data-wise on their users is what they clicked on, right? And what pages got viewed. But like what helps you make the most decisions is understanding the flow. So really kind of instrumenting and being able to see the flow. And then if you're using these tools, right, and you're not seeing kind of the end-to-end process of how users are going through things, and they're like you really want to understand these funnels. And a lot of people don't have a good understanding. They kind of have a few touch points in there, and they kind of get lost about like what the story is and what, you know, when you just have the page views and all of that stuff, like it helps you know how well you're doing, but it doesn't tell you how to fix things. And so you really kind of want like this rich data picture so you can like have a descriptive understanding of what the user actually did.
Is there any service you might recommend, Max?
I think Mixpanel is good for starting out. Amplitude is a bit more advanced. But yeah, I mean, I would probably say like Mixpanel.
Yeah, I'm familiar with both of them. I've used Amplitude in the past, but not on a B2C side. Yeah, I'll definitely look into those, see what kind of offerings they have for like startups and whatnot.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I guess I know Jordan, you probably have a lot of other questions. We're happy to take it offline if there's anything in particular, but otherwise we'll wrap it up. And just wanted to thank you again, Jordan, for stepping up and be willing to allow us to do this teardown with you. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you. So everybody that's been attending, thanks very much for joining. And we will be planning some more of these. So please do look out for an email or some other communication, because we're going to try to do this several other times, and hopefully people get a lot of value out of it. Great. So thanks everyone for joining. Talk to y'all later.